Power does not always collapse when it runs out of options. Sometimes it collapses because it is surrounded by them. Late Imperial Japan did not move toward catastrophe because its leaders failed to choose wisely, but because every available choice threatened the authority they were sworn to preserve. Power was intact, institutions were functioning, obedience still held, and yet decision itself had become dangerous. This essay reframes the final years of Imperial Japan not as a sequence of aggressive gambles or ideological excess, but as a condition where authority had narrowed the field of action so completely that no move could be made without accelerating loss. What follows is not an account of why Japan chose war, but why it reached a point where choosing peace, delay, retreat, or restraint all carried intolerable costs. This moment matters because it reveals how power, when organized to endure, can construct a landscape where survival feels like surrender, and action feels like collapse postponed. By the late 1930s, Japan was already an empire. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 had centralized authority under the emperor, reorganized the state, and fused modern bureaucracy with older notions of sacred legitimacy. The Imperial Japanese Army and Navy were not merely military institutions, they were constitutional actors. Cabinet governments depended on them. Civilian leadership existed, but it rested on a fragile understanding that the armed services were autonomous guardians of national destiny. By 1937, Japan had occupied Manchuria, withdrawn from the League of Nations, and entered full-scale war with China following the Marco Polo Bridge incident. The state was mobilized. Industry was aligned with military demand. The emperor remained the symbolic center, distant yet absolute. Decisions flowed through councils designed to preserve consensus rather than test assumptions. The terrain was defined by institutions that could not easily reverse themselves. The army believed national survival depended on securing resources and strategic depth on the Asian mainland. The Navy understood that any prolonged conflict with Western powers would hinge on access to oil and shipping lanes. Civilian ministries managed an economy increasingly strained by war, embargoes, and mobilization. The imperial conference system formalized decisions already shaped by informal agreement. No single office could impose a change of direction without fracturing legitimacy. At first, success masked constraint. Victories in China reinforced the belief that endurance equaled correctness. Resistance was explained as temporary. International condemnation was treated as misunderstanding. Each year of continued fighting validated the premise that Japan could not afford to retreat without unraveling the authority that justified expansion in the first place. Silence settled where doubt might have formed. By 1940, the pressure sharpened. Japan signed the Tripartite Pact with Germany and Italy, a move framed as deterrence but received internationally as alignment. The United States responded with escalating economic sanctions. Oil exports were restricted. Scrap metal shipments slowed, then stopped. These were not sudden shocks, they were cumulative signals. Yet the structure of Japanese authority interpreted them through a narrow lens. Concession would imply that prior sacrifices had been misjudged. Withdrawal from China would fracture the army's prestige and call into question the emperor's divine guardianship over national destiny. Here, power began to misread itself. Authority equated legitimacy with consistency. To change course would not simply alter policy, it would expose the fragility of the entire framework that bound obedience, sacrifice, and imperial purpose together. Delay became attractive, not because it promised resolution, but because it postponed reckoning. Meetings continued, memoranda circulated. The language of inevitability crept into deliberations. Resource depletion was acknowledged, but reframed as a reason for decisive action rather than restraint. Once oil reserves were calculated in months rather than years, every non-action acquired the weight of decision. Doing nothing was no longer neutral. It was interpreted as choosing weakness. The Army and Navy did not fully agree, but they were trapped by the same logic. The Navy understood that war with the United States was unwinnable in a prolonged sense. The Army understood that retreat from China was politically impossible. Civilian leaders understood that they could neither overrule the military nor dismantle the institutions that defined imperial governance. Authority persisted, but agency narrowed. A quieter erosion unfolded inside the decision-making process itself. Consensus was prized, but consensus under pressure does not generate alternatives. It compresses them. Dissent became procedural rather than substantive. Objections were noted, then absorbed into a collective resolve that framed risk as unavoidable. The emperor's presence, meant to unify, also stabilized the system against rupture. No one wished to be the voice that forced the sacred center to confront contradiction. By mid-1941, Japan faced a closing circle. Oil reserves dwindled. Negotiations with the United States stalled over China. Military planners warned that waiting would only worsen strategic position. Diplomats warned that war would be catastrophic. Both were correct within their own frames. The problem was not miscalculation. It was that calculation itself had become constrained by the need to preserve authority's coherence. This was not a moment of recklessness. It was a moment of structural exhaustion. Every path forward threatened a different pillar of legitimacy. Peace without withdrawal was impossible. Withdrawal without collapse of prestige was unthinkable. Continued negotiation without concessions risked resource strangulation. War promised devastation, but also preserved the narrative that Japan acted rather than yielded. The fracture did not announce itself. It emerged as a narrowing of acceptable speech. Plans were discussed not because they were believed to succeed, but because they allowed authority to remain recognizable to itself. The attack on Pearl Harbor was not imagined as victory in the conventional sense. It was imagined as a way to reset the strategic clock, to force conditions under which Japan could negotiate from a position not yet publicly discredited. Here, power crossed its threshold. Authority still functioned. Orders were obeyed. Institutions remained intact. But the decision space had collapsed inward. War was chosen not because it solved Japan's problems, but because it delayed the internal consequences of admitting that none of the problems could be solved without redefining the state itself. After December 1941, the logic hardened. Early successes reinforced the belief that action had been necessary. Losses were rationalized as temporary. The emperor's silence continued to sanctify continuity. Yet with each passing month, the system's ability to interpret reality degraded. Feedback arrived too late. Reports were filtered. Strategy adjusted at the margins while the central premise remained untouched. Power under pressure does not panic. It perseveres. It substitutes motion for adaptation. Late Imperial Japan did not lack intelligence, courage, or discipline. It lacked an institutional mechanism to survive contradiction. Authority had been constructed to endure external threats, not to absorb internal reversal. As defeat became unavoidable, the same logic persisted. Even surrender was delayed until the physical destruction of the state made continuity impossible. The atomic bombings and Soviet entry into the war did not introduce a new reality. They overwhelmed an old one that had exhausted its capacity to reinterpret itself. Only when authority could no longer claim to be preserving the nation did the final decision become speakable. The unsettling implication is not that Japan chose wrongly at a particular fork in the road, but that by the late 1930s the road had already narrowed beyond safe passage. Power had succeeded too well at binding legitimacy to endurance. When survival became indistinguishable from consistency, authority lost the ability to retreat without imploding. The story does not end with collapse. It ends with a recognition that power, once stabilized, begins to protect its own coherence more fiercely than the conditions it was meant to govern. Late Imperial Japan did not lack options. It lacked options that preserved the meaning of power as it had been constructed. And when power cannot imagine itself transformed, it treats every alternative as extinction. The pressure does not release here. It lingers in the space between obedience and agency, where authority continues to function even as its field of movement disappears. The danger is not sudden failure, but the moment when power realizes, too late, that every remaining decision carries the same cost, and calls that inevitability fate. If this story gave you something to think about, consider subscribing to Timeless Questions. We explore history, philosophy, and the patterns that quietly guide human behavior.